And we'd now like to introduce Chris Grew from Orrick, who will deliver a few words before we get stuck into the conversations.
Hi, I'm Chris Grew, a partner at tech law firm Orrick. In the 5 years that Orrick has been supporting the state of European tech, we've seen the amount of investment grow exponentially. And again, this growth trajectory continues with new record levels of investment this year. At the same time, it's been an absolute joy to witness the report evolve into a platform for everybody united by a common drive to contribute to European tech success. And this year is no exception. Here are a few key trends that Orrick has seen this past year. First, Europe is experiencing the strongest pipeline of early-stage investment. Second, the European startup market is putting up remarkable results across the company lifecycle spectrum. Rapid investment and big exits are now the norm for Europe. Thirdly, the European tech ecosystem is marching to the beat of its own drum, gaining significant ground internationally with unprecedented investment volume and valuation growth. And finally, as the report is now recognized as the industry benchmark, we're also happy to see it continue to highlight issues we all need to address collectively, especially diversity, equality, and inclusion. These are extremely exciting times to be part of the European tech and venture ecosystem, and honestly, Orrick could not be more proud to be part of that. We hope you enjoy the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Now, let's go to Helsinki, Finland, where Miika Huttunen, the CEO of Slush, who've been our partner since the very inception of this report, will introduce our first discussion.
Hi, and welcome to Helsinki. I'm Miika, CEO at Slush. And for those who don't know, Slush is a not-for-profit organization with the mission to create and help founders to change the world. The thing that we are maybe the most known of is our annual event held in Helsinki around November and December. I think some of you visited Slush last week, but for those who didn't, I hope to see you next year in 2022. Slush has partnered up with Atomico for the State of the European Tech ever since the day one in 2015. We think that it's absolutely necessary to build the data infrastructure to understand where we are in Europe and where we should head next. Talking about that, the next discussion is incredibly important, not just only for me, but also for the Finnish ecosystem around. The next discussion will be moderated by maybe the most well-known Finnish entrepreneur, Ilkka Paananen, co-founder and CEO of Supercell. And with Ilkka, he's joined by not just only one, but actually 3 former Slush CEOs. Miki Kuusi, co-founder and CEO of Wolt, COO Riku Mäkelä, and the VP of New Markets, Marianne Vikkula. And one of the reasons why this discussion is so special for me is that these 3 people have defined the ambition level for me and for many others over and over again. When I was 19, I looked up to these people when they were building Slush, and now after the success of Wolt, they once again defined the ambition level to new heights, and they continue to inspire me to build different things in the future. I hope you enjoy the discussion.
Hello, my name is Ilkka Paananen. I'm the CEO and founder of Supercell. And I'm here in Helsinki at the Wolt headquarters, together with 3 very special people. Miki Kuusi, who's the CEO and founder, Riku Mäkelä, the COO, and Marianne Vikkula, VP of New Markets. So I want to start with an obvious question. You guys just announced a massive deal whereby DoorDash acquires Wolt. The value of the deal is 7 billion euros. Has that sunk in yet?
I don't really think so. We've been working incredibly hard over these last 7 years, and even more so in the last few months and weeks leading up to this point. So it kind of feels like, we've had this very tall mountain we've been climbing over these years, and whenever you've gotten to a milestone, whether it's like raising an A round of 10 million or C round of 100 million or a 7 billion euro exit, you kind of, when you get to the top of the mountain, you're like, we worked so hard to get here, and we were looking at this point and thinking and dreaming that maybe one day we could get there. And once you get there, it's kind of like, we're here, but there's a new mountain, and we're only getting started on that one. So I don't think it really has sunk in yet. And there's a Zen Buddhist saying I like, which goes that before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. So that's kind of how I feel like at the moment.
Marianne, how do you feel?
I mean, can only echo. Few very, very hectic weeks behind. It's been an amazing journey, but it will continue being so. So we're not going anywhere.
Riku?
Well, I think anybody that's been in the position of perhaps like not that type of sale, but like a big financing event or something knows that it's a bit of work to get across the line, the actual sort of hours you have to put in, and I think that kind of hinders your ability to see the situation when it's actually done. So I think we're still in that kind of mode and sort of processing it, but I think it's starting to sink in slowly.
You get to the goal, it's good to celebrate, it's good to feel good about it, but the reality is that on Monday you go back to work and you have another mountain to climb.
So what makes the three of you very special in addition to Wolt is that three of you guys have been the CEOs of Slush, the big tech conference that's happening here in Helsinki. So you sort of bring a very unique perspective in a sense that you've been the CEOs of Slush, and then you built Wolt to where it is today. So what type of role did that experience sort of has played in how you think about your careers and also like how you thought about scaling Wolt?
Building Slush was a fantastic experience for both as a CEO and as an entrepreneur. Because we were this bootstrapped operation without any financing, being able to pay our salaries if we had made enough partnerships and ticket sales in the month. Ultimately taking a lot of risk to build something where we, in the years I was running Slush, we tripled every year. And as an event, it basically means that you're tripling your cost base and trusting that you will get the revenue in the months to come to actually pay for that cost base. So I think it was this kind of an experience that molded all three of us as leaders when it comes to how you build something from nothing and how you kind of lead something through very demanding times.
And see what world class looks like, as nothing like that had been built before. You had to just figure out what does the best in class look like when you don't know what the best in class is.
Riku, what would you say? What was the most important lesson you learned through Slush experience that you've applied at Wolt?
To take an individual lesson would be rather difficult. I think what I'll say first is like one of the things we're going to talk about today is sort of these network effects, these flywheel effects, if we call them that, of kind of people having success or learning from one thing and then going to apply to the next thing. And that's what I always thought Slush was. It was a school. And by the way, it wasn't a school for the three of us. It was a school for thousands of people and still remains a school for thousands of people. And all those people are going to go on to do really great things. Hopefully, actually, I'm fairly certain of it that they will. But that's the number one thing. What would I take away on a concrete level? I think it's a lot of the little things, like sort of first-time manager of 10 people, first-time manager of 50 people, screwing something up, doing big mistakes in hiring, doing successful hiring, like all the kind of fundamentals you need to do in building a company. You, through Slush, had to do a little bit too early on in your career, which meant that you could do those mistakes early on enough to where then you can sort of correct them quite quickly, if that makes sense.
So you obviously started Wolt, here in Helsinki, Finland, but since then you've expanded to dozens and dozens of countries and been super successful, like growing your business also outside Finland. So what would be the main lessons that you could share with our entrepreneurs looking to do the same?
Yeah, I think one thing that has been like an elemental thing of building Wolt since the start was that we always had a big vision for what we wanted to do, like a big market. We saw that there's going to be, like, the world is going online. That's what's happening. And I was thinking that, how are the cities going to go online? And I figured that, local services, shops, boutiques, restaurants, they're going to end up online one way or another. So we had this kind of big vision, big market to work off with. But then you need to have like the first step and the second step and the third step. And these steps need to be very small, that you can see that step by step, if you take hundreds and thousands of steps, you can ultimately end up towards the vision. And I think finding that balance between having a massive market, massive opportunity, big vision, but ultimately, we were a takeaway service for 10 restaurants in Helsinki back in 2015. So you need to get started somewhere. And I think finding the balance between those two things is very, very important. I think in Wolt's journey, what you can find is that we were always super focused on, on the customer, building the best possible service for the customer. Building the best possible product to be able to get there, to be able to do this in environments where it's difficult, to have an amazing customer experience because population density or income disparity or these kind of things that make last mile delivery easy in some markets. That's not the case in our markets. So we need to find efficiency through technology and our culture. But I think this balance between, big vision, step by step getting there, and also finding niches in a big market. Our market is one of the biggest markets in the world. You don't need to win the US to build a massive company. And for us, we kind of saw that people eat everywhere. And most of the people in most of the countries don't have a service like the service that we were building. So we kind of figured that we might not have the biggest war chest, but we're going to be very efficient when it comes to creating value for as many customers as possible in all different parts of the world. And today we operate in 23 countries.
So Marianne, you've led this expansion. What advice would you give to somebody who's looking to do the same?
Yeah, Miki told well about the market opportunity, but then obviously this is a business of execution. And we've been always a company about doing common things uncommonly well. So really excelling at the things you really need to excel, be it in customer experience, in recruiting, in team building, leadership, doing the common things uncommonly well. And a practical example could be maybe recruiting. When we go to a completely new market where we've never been before, you have to go and get the people. No one's going to apply. Go and hunt the people down you need and go after them. You need to run. And that applies to all the new things when you go to a new market. Just get your hands dirty.
So what do you do in practice? You go to LinkedIn and browse for people, or?
Literally that. Then use accounts of people that have the most power to look influential, have calls with them, pitch them. It's a sales story, right? Yeah. Just like you would be selling a service you've built. You're selling the company to the candidate, and that has to take as long as the candidate is convinced that, okay, this is an opportunity I want to pursue, and then you switch to a mode of, okay, is this person someone we want to work with actually?
So as a board member of Wolt, one of the things I was most impressed with, and I remember you and I having discussion about the expansion to Japan, which obviously feels like an extremely difficult thing to do, and there's a very small number of companies in the Western world who've even been able to do that. But you guys been surprisingly successful there. So did the exact same lessons apply to Japan?
Ultimately, yeah. We need to find the best people, and we need to find them literally. No one's going to come to us, especially in Japan, where the brand is not at all known. Beyond that, identify the best restaurants in our business model. So basically what makes your platform local, and that's all about this business. It's not even cities, it's neighborhoods. So you need to be there on the ground to really understand what the customers want and what makes sense in Hiroshima or Sapporo or Tokyo. And there's no way you can do that only by being in Helsinki.
So Riku, you obviously have played a key role in the kind of birth of the State of European Tech report. Tell us how did that come about, and especially I was asked you to ask you the question where did that happen?
The origin story is a bit weird, and I'll get into it. But the background is there are a few of these sort of reporting institutions, cool things that come out annually on various sectors and industries that everybody in that space look up to. There's one very well-known one on the internet, for example, and we were kind of talking about these and thinking there's a lot going on in Europe all of a sudden, there hadn't been for decades, if ever, in terms of tech, and suddenly it was coming up, and there were individual pieces of information, somebody was talking about there being a boom in venture capital and showed some chart of how that was going in a nice direction, and people were talking about talent shortages in different areas of Europe, and there being great hubs for talent in others, and we kind of asked ourselves why is no one putting that together to where you could just sort of see what's going on in European tech by browsing one sort of report or one publication or whatever it may be. And we thought if we do that consistently for 5 years or 10 years, and we actually were talking of a longer time already at that point, we figured it could maybe become a sort of institution that people refer to when they think of what's going on in tech in Europe. So that was the seed of thought into this. And then what actually happened is we were doing Slush in Tokyo at the time. We had a few international events, and Tom, the head of research at Atomico, he was a speaker at the event, and it's a pretty funny story. There's an actual tent sauna, a very sort of Finnish concept, obviously, brought to the streets of Tokyo. It was an outside event, and for some reason we found ourselves having a drink in the tent sauna with Tom, and we kind of got talking about exactly the things that I just referred to. So, like, why was nobody doing this? It was a great time for tech in Europe, and no one was sort of pulling all the data together and telling everybody what it looks like analytically. Where are things going? We said, why don't we take a stab at that? And of course, the first year, you could argue, was a very handmade version of it, where we tried to find partners that could provide us with information as to what the hell's going on in the first place, and then it kind of matured and went from there. And of course, to be completely fair, I haven't really been involved with this for like 6 years at this point, so it's much better and bigger than we ever imagined at the time. But that was the origin story.
Right, and it was 2015, right? And the first
I believe that was
report.
2015, yes.
Yeah, so I was checking out the report, and I think in that report we were getting super excited about, I think it was like 10 billion being invested into European startups. We had reached, I think, 10 unicorns, like companies valued over $1 billion at that time. How do you think?
I have to say one thing, because I remember when we were doing the first report, there was a page on unicorns in general and some categorization of them, and there were still few enough to where we would put the logos onto a slide to show the ones that exist. And the funny thing is, if you did that today, well, first of all, nobody with a PowerPoint or any other tool would bother to do that, because there's probably hundreds and you wouldn't even find the logos. But there's a few of these sort of anecdotes where it's really easy to see how things have changed over the last half a decade.
So what would you say it has changed, say, from 2015 when the first version of a report came out?
For me, what has changed the most is, it's a bit of a theory to practice matter, right? But like, there was a lot of talk back 5 or 6 years ago about like talent availability and how many people wanted to get into startups or growth companies or whatever. And I think, especially coming from Helsinki, like, it wasn't obvious. It was not an obvious choice for a lot of people, even though there was this supposed boom at the time. But I would still argue it hadn't kind of gone mainstream to where people from more traditional companies that had worked there for 15 or 20 years would seriously be considering taking that leap of faith. I think that's the biggest change. Like, you see people coming into growth companies from completely different, almost unimaginable backgrounds sort of 5 years ago. Like, you never would have thought those types of people would have come to these types of companies for jobs and been successful, and they definitely are. And to me, that's the biggest change.
Marianne, what's been the biggest change for you?
Absolutely that. On top of it, obviously, availability of capital. It's completely different. Nowadays, I see VCs really competing to get into a round over here, whereas 5 years ago, you were really chasing as an entrepreneur for funding. And usually, there wasn't any available in Finland, in the Nordics, barely in Europe. So massive change.
Yeah, I remember when we raised our first €500,000 round of financing back in 2014. It was a real fight to get that round together, in hindsight. And today, and back in the days, like raising a €500,000 round was unheard of, at least in Finland. Like, that was a humongous round and crazy valuation for a company that basically was founded a week earlier. But I think, like, today there's so much more examples that we can build these companies also out of Europe. This is not a Silicon Valley thing anymore. Like, we can have global and local champions emerge that were not founded in London. They were not founded even in Berlin. Like, they were founded in some place where there was a group of people and talent, and they saw something that they wanted to solve. And I think that power of the internet, and how we're not only building global services anymore, but we're building hyperlocal services, means that there's going to be more and more success stories coming from like unobvious places. And I think that's really the big change. And the power of example is very, very important in this, because I remember, as a kid working at Supercell back in 2012, and that was the crazy year of Rovio and Angry Birds. I remember you said in a meeting that I'll be damned if our ambition is to be the second largest gaming company out of Finland. And I remember, because it was a crazy thing to say at the time, because Angry Birds was like this unheard of thing coming out of like Finland and coming out of Europe, that how could anyone build something bigger than that? And that's what you guys did. And I think this kind of power of examples is showing people in Europe that we can build these companies. These companies can come out of here. They can be built by people that don't have to go to Silicon Valley anymore to do this.
It's funny, back in the days, 5-6 years ago, we always were saying like there's something happening in the Nordics or there's something happening in Europe to kind of demystify and start the story of there's a lot of good stuff cooking here, you just don't know about it. And now people do know about it. It's out there.
Definitely changed, yeah.
So Marianne, like Riku already mentioned about this concept, known as the flywheel. So this idea that success creates success. Talk a bit about that. Like, what role? First of all, have you experienced that with Wolt, and if so, how?
Obviously, it's only getting started over here, but we're far ahead where we were 5-10 years ago. Obviously, Supercell and the gaming companies being the first wave, and all the knowledge and also ability to invest further that came from that is now nurturing the second or the third wave, how would you want to put it, of flywheel over here in the Nordics. And it's not just about the capital and the angels that come about, but also just the knowledge of building these companies. That's even harder than the capital, at least in my opinion.
So to keep that like flywheel going on, like what role will each of the three of you guys play in the next chapter?
I think we'll keep building. Like, it's still very early days for our company. It's still very early days for our industry. What I'm most excited about is that I remember being this like young kid in 2012 working for Supercell back in the days when Supercell was like a 40-person company, and sitting here, I kind of recognize everything I got from that journey to be able to do the things that I've done. And my hope is that having over 4,000 people working at Wolt today, that we're going to be able to create as many similar stories as my personal story through the people of Wolt. And ultimately, as Marianne says, it all comes down to people. And I think we as a company, we as individuals, we're ultimately growing people that I think are going to build amazing companies. Today, hopefully continue to build Wolt also for many years, but eventually doing other companies, joining existing companies or founding new companies.
Considering how many people are employed at Wolt, like I don't know, Miki, what your number is, but I would definitely be bummed if the current employees of Wolt didn't start at least 100 companies over the next 5 years. Because we do employ thousands of people, and most people are very entrepreneurially minded. In fact, I think there's already like 5 or 6 that exist that I know of, probably more that I don't know of. And to see that become more than 100 or several hundred, I don't think that's a stretch of imagination by any means.
No. And each of the moments when you see someone from the community, be it a Wolt alumni or a Slush alumni or the wider ecosystem alumni, setting up a company of their own is definitely a moment of like being proud about what we've done so far.
Fantastic. So my favorite piece of this year's report was this data point. I'm going to read it aloud from here. So the report is saying that Europe accounts for 33% of all capital invested globally in rounds of up to $5 million, and we are now on par with the US for the first time. So how important are the early stage investors for you guys, and what advice would you give to a founder who's looking for the best early stage investors?
Yeah, we wouldn't be here without our like early investors like yourself and like a bunch of like other ex-operators and entrepreneurs who've kind of seen what it is like to build a company like this themselves. I think like once companies get to this kind of scale-up phase, it becomes more of a science of like how you scale up a company and how you build different functions and so forth. And there's a lot of very good professional growth stage investors who know that really well. But when you're in the early stage, like it's not a science, it's an art. And you need like other artists to be able to succeed in that phase. And I think like other people who've gone through the journey kind of understand what it is like to try to have like constrained resources, to be constantly in a place where you're gonna run out of money unless you're able to figure this thing out, how to build amazing product, get amazing customer experience, build an organization, build a culture, deal with the stress of it all. So like my advice on that is, try to find people that kind of understand what it is really like to go through that, because that's the kind of support you need in the very early stage.
Marianne and Riku, what would you guys look in an early stage investor?
I have to agree with Miki. Like, even if I think in the later years, like early investors such as yourself, like what's the most important thing that we got from that relationship? It was trust initially to be able to do the things that we wanted to do, and then it was a lot of emotional support later. And that's actually a surprisingly undervalued part of that relationship, is the just sort of the emotional support for when things are difficult. Like, it's difficult to explain how shitty things can feel and how much sort of help can be derived from the fact that somebody trusted you as an investor is also there for you in that situation. So I think that's a big part of it that people underappreciate.
Yeah, it's a rough journey to go through.
Very.
It's a rough journey to go through. Like we have gone through this 7 years and ended up now in this like big transaction and everything. But there were multiple times when we were running out of money. We didn't have a long runway left. It was difficult to find investors. We needed to cut down on costs and
Laying
so
off
forth.
people that are your friends.
Yeah, so it's not
things.
like none of these journeys are like these straight arrow journeys where you just like go from success to success. The reality is that there's a lot of hurdles you need to go through, and you need support in dealing with those hurdles because it's very lonely and very heavy to go through those battles.
And you're doing it for the first time.
Yeah.
In most of
Yes.
the cases. And that's exactly the point where the early stage investors can help. It's not that difficult typically, but the first time is always difficult. So once you know how to deal with it, it's so much easier.
This is the reason why people probably don't found like a second successful company, because you're going to realize that
After the first one, you know what it is, and then you don't want to do it again.
you don't want to do it again.
Fantastic. Where does European tech go from here? Is it mission accomplished?
I mean, certainly not. I think if you think about this type of stuff, it's always like compounding effects. So if we think about where the world was in 2013, and that was kind of the early predictor of what it was going to be a couple years later, then at that time we thought it would maybe go here, and it sort of far exceeded that. I think that's what we'll see. It's really difficult for the human mind to grasp like how big things can actually become. You just sort of try to linearly extrapolate things that already exist. And I think if we look at European tech, it's just going to keep going on the same sort of exponential trajectory. And it's tough to concretely visualize what that would mean in 2 or 3 years. But I think we'll sit here in 2 or 3 years wondering how the heck that happened again. I think that's what'll happen.
So we are gonna end this session with a lightning round. So I want each of you guys to give me, in just one sentence, only one sentence, Miki, a prediction about European tech, and a surprising prediction. Who wants to go first?
I can go first. We already talked a little bit about the sort of funding landscape, early stage venture capital, but the one thing we didn't touch upon was sort of the overall venture capital situation. In a sentence, what I would say the prediction that I personally make for the next 5 years is that the funding gap between US and Europe will become much smaller, much smaller than what people think, perhaps based on today.
Yeah, this is not a surprising prediction. At least to me, it's evident. I think we're going to have at least 5 to 10 companies valued at over 100 billion euros coming out of Europe in the next 5 years.
And continuing from the discussion we've had on enabling cities and local shops, I definitely think we'll see a renaissance of brick and mortar shops flourishing in downtowns thanks to technology.
Fantastic. Marianne, Riku, Miki, thank you very much for sharing these thoughts. Very inspiring, and congratulations again.
Thank you.
Thank you.